He was 25 when he was made to marry a 65-year-old woman, but she had very specific plans. He was only 25, and he believed life was just beginning to open up before him. The years of studying, working hard, and dreaming about his own future seemed to have finally brought him to a point where he could make his own choices. Every morning, he woke up imagining a life where he could build his career, make his own decisions, and perhaps one day find someone to share his dreams and happiness with. But he never expected that everything he believed about the future could change in a single afternoon, with just a few words from the people he trusted most. It started like any other day. The sun was streaming through his small bedroom window. Birds were singing outside, and the faint aroma of breakfast cooking downstairs filled the air. He stretched and smiled, thinking about the small steps he had already taken toward independence, a new job he had been offered, the tiny apartment he was planning to rent, and the little savings he had been carefully setting aside for the future. He felt proud of himself and excited about the possibilities that awaited him. Then his father called him into the living room. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but as he walked in, he noticed the serious expressions on his parents' faces. Their calm but firm looks made him uneasy. Before he could sit down or ask what was happening, his father spoke. "Son, we have made a decision about your marriage."
Marriage at 20.
He had always known that his family cared deeply about traditions, but he had never expected anything to happen this soon. "Marriage?" he asked cautiously, trying to sound normal, though a hint of anxiety crept into his voice. I haven't even thought about... We know, son, but this is very important for the family, and it's something we need you to accept. He frowned, feeling a strange mix of confusion and worry. He had expected conversations about family decisions, jobs, or financial matters, but nothing like this. He tried to steady his breathing as he waited for his father to continue. "You will be marrying a woman from a respected family," his father said, his voice calm but firm. "She is 65 years old." His mind froze, trying to process the information. 65? That was more than twice his age. The idea felt surreal, as though someone had suddenly dropped him into a story he could not believe was real. He blinked, hoping that he had misunderstood. Perhaps they were joking? But when he looked at their serious faces, he realized that this was no joke. You mean you want me to marry her?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," his father said, nodding slightly. "It has been decided. This marriage will help secure the future of our family. She is wealthy, respected, and she needs someone she can trust. We believe this arrangement will benefit everyone." He sank into the chair, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts at once. How could this happen? He was just beginning his life. He had dreams of love, of starting a family with someone his own age, of exploring the world with a partner who could share his energy and ideas, and now he was being told that he would marry someone more than 40 years older than him. It seemed impossible. He tried to protest, trying to explain that he had plans, dreams, and a life he wanted to live for himself. I can't. I have goals. I want to study more, maybe travel, find someone I actually care about," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. His parents listened patiently, though he noticed the firmness in their eyes. "Son, we understand your feelings," his mother said softly, "but this is not about love or romance. It is about responsibility. We have worked hard to provide for this family, and now it is your turn to make a sacrifice. You will understand one day that this is for everyone's good." He felt his heart sink. Sacrifice. That word made him feel small, as if his own desires and hopes did not matter. He had always respected his parents and trusted their judgment, but this request seemed unbearable. He could not imagine spending his life with someone so much older, someone whose past and present were already so different from his own. Days turned into sleepless nights as he struggled with the decision. He walked around his small apartment, staring at the walls, thinking about his future, and trying to imagine what life would be like with a woman more than twice his age. He thought about his friends, many of whom were just starting careers and relationships with people their own age. The thought of explaining the situation to anyone filled him with embarrassment and dread. Every night, he sat by the window, staring at the moon and stars, asking himself how life had led him to this point. He wondered if there was any way to refuse without hurting his family. But every time he imagined saying no, he saw the disappointed faces of his parents, the worry in their eyes, and the sacrifices they had made for him. A deep sense of guilt began to weigh on him, heavier than any fear or confusion. Eventually, he accepted that his parents would not change their minds. They had made their decision, and their minds were firm. Resistance seemed useless, so with a mixture of fear, resignation, and silent hope that he might find some meaning in the future, he agreed to the marriage. The wedding preparations were unlike anything he had imagined. The family was polite but quiet, avoiding unnecessary questions or comments about the unusual pairing. Guests whispered behind closed doors, their curiosity evident but restrained. The ceremony itself was simple, yet filled with a formal elegance. He felt the eyes of many people on him, some sympathetic, some judging, some simply curious. When he first saw her on the day of the wedding, he felt a mixture of shock and awe. She was older, yes, but there was a calm dignity about her. Her posture was straight, her eyes clear and bright, and her expression unreadable. She wore a simple, elegant outfit, and there was no sign of the frivolity or weakness he had expected. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet strength that made him feel both intimidated and strangely curious. As he stood beside her, signing the marriage papers, he felt a flood of conflicting emotions. Fear, uncertainty, and confusion battled with a strange sense of anticipation. He did not know what awaited him in this marriage, whether it would be filled with discomfort, learning, or something else entirely. All he knew was that his life, as he had imagined it, had taken a turn he could never have predicted. The first few days in her home were filled with awkwardness. He noticed how carefully everything was arranged, how every object seemed to have a specific place, and how her movements reflected years of experience and discipline. She spoke little, observing him quietly, and he found himself unsure of how to behave. Should he speak or remain silent? Should he try to joke or simply follow her lead? Even though he felt like a stranger in this new home, he also sensed that there was something more beneath her calm exterior. Her eyes sometimes held a spark, a quiet intelligence, as if she had a plan he did not yet understand. And slowly, a realization began to form in his mind. This marriage was not just about wealth or family duty. She had her own reasons, her own expectations, and perhaps her own plan for him. As he lay in bed that first night in a room that felt unfamiliar and strange, he could not stop thinking about the journey ahead. He thought about the life he had dreamed of and how it had changed in a single decision. But amid the confusion and anxiety, there was also a tiny flicker of curiosity. Perhaps this unusual arrangement, as difficult as it seemed, might teach him something new. Perhaps it might shape him into a man he had not yet imagined he could become. And so, with a mix of trepidation, hope, and quiet determination, he closed his eyes, preparing himself for a life that would be unlike anything he had planned. He did not yet know what lay ahead, but deep down he sensed that this unusual marriage would become a turning point, one that would challenge him, test him, and, in ways he could not yet see, change him forever. When he entered her home for the first time as her husband, he realized immediately that nothing in his life had prepared him for this experience. The house was large, filled with antique furniture, polished floors, and framed photographs that seemed to capture decades of her life. There was a quiet, almost solemn air in every room, as if the walls themselves had watched the passage of time and held countless untold stories. He could feel the weight of her life in every corner, yet there was also a sense of warmth and care that made the house feel less like a museum and more like a carefully maintained sanctuary. At first, he was unsure of how to move around. Every step felt cautious, every word carefully measured. She watched him silently, her posture upright, her face calm, as though she were assessing how he would adapt to the rhythms of her life. He realized that she was not the kind of person who wasted time on small talk or meaningless gestures. Every action she took seemed deliberate, and he felt that he had entered a world where he would need to learn quickly if he wanted to fit in. She introduced him to the household in the most ordinary yet peculiar way. She showed him which rooms were for which purposes, where he could place his belongings, and how she preferred the daily chores to be managed. She spoke with authority, but never harshly. Her tone was firm, yet there was a quiet kindness in it that made him feel both respected and slightly intimidated. He had never lived with anyone so structured before, and he quickly realized that he would have to adapt if he wanted to live peacefully in her home. The first few days were awkward. He was used to a life where he could come and go, spend time as he wished, and make decisions without consulting anyone else. Here, he had to consider her routines and preferences. Breakfast was served at exactly 8 in the morning, with each item placed neatly on the table. She expected him to sit, eat politely, and engage in light conversation, if appropriate. There were no rushed mornings, no careless moments. Everything had a rhythm, a purpose. Though the structure felt restrictive at first, he began to notice things that surprised him. She asked questions about his life, his studies, and his ambitions. At first he felt suspicious, wondering why she would care about his thoughts or dreams. But as he answered, he realized that she was genuinely interested. She did not ask these questions out of curiosity alone. She seemed to want to understand who he was, what he wanted from life, and how she could help him grow. One afternoon, as he sat in the sunlit living room, she asked him about his job aspirations. "What do you want to do, really?" she asked calmly, her eyes steady on his. He hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But there was a sincerity in her voice that encouraged him to speak honestly. He talked about the small dreams he had nurtured quietly, the ideas for a business he had considered starting, the desire to study more about finance, and the hope of eventually helping others in his community. She listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. Then she said something that made him pause. "You have potential," she said. "I can see that, but potential alone is not enough. You need guidance, discipline, and experience. That is why I want to help you." At first, he did not understand what she meant. He thought she was speaking in general terms, perhaps offering advice that anyone could give. But over the next few days, it became clear that she had specific plans for him. She encouraged him to wake early, maintain a disciplined routine, and take on small responsibilities around the house. She wanted him to learn how to manage tasks, organize time, and approach life with a sense of purpose. Even simple things felt like lessons. She showed him how to balance household finances, manage bills, and plan for future expenses. At first, he felt embarrassed, thinking that these were skills he should have already known. But she never made him feel small or incapable. Instead, she guided him patiently, correcting mistakes gently, and praising effort. Slowly, he began to see that her strictness was not about control. It was about teaching him responsibility and independence. He noticed something else. She had a sharp mind. Her years had not dulled her intelligence. In fact, they seemed to have sharpened it. She spoke about investments, saving strategies, and managing risks in ways that fascinated him. For a man who had only recently begun thinking seriously about his own future, these conversations were both intimidating and enlightening. He started to feel that he was learning things that most people twice his age had yet to understand. One evening, she invited him to sit with her in the study, a room filled with bookshelves and neatly stacked documents. She explained her own life story, how she had worked tirelessly to build her wealth, how she had faced challenges and setbacks, and how she had learned to trust only a few people with her life and resources. He listened intently, absorbing every word, realizing that he was being given a rare opportunity to learn not just about money, but about life itself. Her lessons were not limited to business or finance. She taught him about patience, empathy, and decision-making. She shared experiences where quick, impulsive choices had led to problems, and how careful planning and thoughtfulness could prevent mistakes. He began to understand that this marriage, which had initially seemed like a burden, was slowly transforming into a mentorship, a partnership built on trust, knowledge, and guidance. Despite the growing respect he felt for her, he still struggled with the idea of living with someone so much older. There were moments of discomfort and awkwardness, times when he felt out of place or uncertain, but she never forced intimacy, never imposed unrealistic expectations, and always respected his boundaries. Her approach was subtle. She led by example, showed care through actions, and guided him with wisdom rather than commands. He also noticed that she expected him to think independently. She encouraged him to make small decisions on his own, to consider consequences, and to learn from mistakes. Whenever he faced difficulty, she provided advice but never dictated solutions. Its balance between guidance and autonomy helped him grow more confident in his abilities. He began to see that she was not trying to control him. She was trying to prepare him for a life where he could stand on his own. Life in her house gradually became less intimidating and more engaging. He started to enjoy the structured routine, the quiet conversations, and the small lessons that came with everyday activities. He learned to wake early, organize his day, and appreciate the value of discipline. Even mundane tasks like managing the kitchen or planning a budget began to feel like exercises in responsibility and self-improvement. Neighbors who once whispered about the unusual marriage slowly began to see changes in him. He appeared more mature, composed, and thoughtful. People were curious, but also respectful, noticing the subtle growth in the young man who had once seemed uncertain and lost. He realized that this transformation was not just about learning from her. It was about understanding himself and discovering a side of life he had never encountered before. One day she asked him about his dreams again, but this time in a deeper way. "What do you truly want to achieve?" she asked. Her question was not casual. It carried the weight of expectation and hope. He realized that she wanted him to define his own path, but she also wanted to ensure he had the tools to walk it successfully. That realization struck him profoundly. This marriage, which he had once seen as a trap, was slowly becoming a gateway to personal growth and understanding. He started to feel gratitude, something he had not expected in the early days. Gratitude for her patience, her guidance, and the careful way she was shaping his life. he understood that while he had been thrust into an unusual situation, he had been given a rare chance to learn, grow, and prepare for the future in a way that few people experienced at such a young age. By the end of the first month in her house, he felt a mix of emotions. Still some confusion, occasional discomfort, but also growing respect, curiosity, and hope. He had come to realize that this unusual marriage was not just about living together or following family expectations. It was about transformation, about learning from someone who had experienced life in ways he could only imagine, and about preparing for a future that he had yet to fully understand. And in quiet moments, when the house was still and the sun cast gentle shadows across the floors, he found himself wondering about her deeper intentions. He could sense that she had plans for him, plans that were more than just about companionship or wealth. What exactly those plans were, he did not yet know, but he felt that in time he would discover the full purpose of this extraordinary arrangement. For the first time since the marriage had been announced, he felt a cautious sense of optimism. Perhaps he thought there was more to this unusual journey than he had ever imagined. Perhaps the life he had dreaded might turn into an unexpected adventure, filled with lessons, growth, and experiences that would shape him forever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and by now he had begun to feel somewhat settled in the large, quiet house. The initial awkwardness of living with someone so much older had faded, replaced by a growing sense of curiosity and a strange comfort in the routine she had set. Yet, despite the apparent calm, he knew that his life was changing in ways he could not yet fully understand. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the tall windows of the study, she asked him to sit beside her. "I think it's time you learned something more," she said, her voice calm yet firm. He looked at her, unsure what she meant. He had already been learning small lessons about managing the household, balancing finances, and handling daily responsibilities. Could there be more? She handed him a small notebook. "This," she said, "is where we will start planning for your future." He looked at the notebook, blank and inviting, unsure how to begin. She explained that it would contain practical lessons in managing life, from handling money to making important decisions, lessons she had learned over decades of experience. He felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Her approach was gentle but purposeful. Each day she would introduce new concepts, sometimes simple, sometimes complex. She taught him how to organize finances, how to save wisely, and how to invest cautiously. He had never thought about these things in depth, and at first he made mistakes. But she never scolded him. Instead, she corrected him patiently, explained why certain decisions worked and others did not, and encouraged him to think critically. "What you are learning now," she told him one evening, "is more than just about money. It is about understanding the value of your decisions. Every choice you make shapes your future, and learning early is better than learning through hardship." Her lessons often went beyond numbers and plans. She encouraged him to read, to expand his knowledge, and to think deeply about life. She would ask him about current events, about people he admired, and about challenges he faced at work. He realized that she was not just preparing him to manage her wealth, but to manage his own life wisely. At first he felt overwhelmed. Tacity jungler, and the responsibility of learning so much so quickly was daunting. There were moments when he wanted to retreat, to spend his days as he once had, carefree and without pressure. But she had a way of gently insisting that he rise to the challenge. She would remind him that youth was a gift, that the skills he learned now would last a lifetime, and that discipline was the foundation of success. Slowly, he began to understand the depth of her intentions. This marriage, he realized, was not simply about companionship or family duty. She had carefully chosen him because she saw potential in him, a spark that could grow if nurtured correctly. She was not just a wife, she was a mentor, guiding him with patience, wisdom, and experience that he could not have found anywhere else. She introduced him to her network of friends and associates, people who had built businesses, managed organizations, and faced challenges similar to what he might encounter in the future. At first he felt nervous in their presence. These were people older, more experienced, and seemingly far beyond his years. But she encouraged him to listen, observe, and ask questions. One evening, as they spoke with a respected businessman she knew, she whispered to him, "Pay attention. You can learn more from their mistakes than from their successes." That simple advice stuck with him. He realized that she was teaching him not only through direct lessons, but also through observation and experience. With each passing month, he noticed changes within himself. He was thinking more clearly, making decisions with greater care, and approaching problems with patience instead of panic. His confidence was growing, slowly but steadily. Where he once felt uncertain about his abilities, he now began to see that he had the capacity to achieve much more than he had imagined. Despite the growing bond and respect he felt for her, he still struggled with certain feelings of discomfort. Living with someone so much older was not easy. He sometimes felt out of place in conversations, unsure if his opinions mattered or worried that he might fail to meet her expectations. But she never pressured him to conform. Instead, she allowed him to learn at his own pace, gently guiding him without ever forcing him. One day, she asked him to take on a small project, organizing part of the household finances and planning a minor investment. He was nervous, unsure if he could succeed. But she encouraged him with a quiet smile and a few words of advice. He worked carefully, making notes, reviewing decisions, and double-checking his work. When he completed the task, she praised his effort and provided constructive feedback. The satisfaction he felt that day was unlike anything he had experienced before. He realized that success was not just about results, but about learning, effort, and growth. Over time, he began to notice that the lessons she provided were not random. Every skill he learned, every task he completed seemed to have a purpose beyond the immediate moment. She was preparing him for independence, for responsibility, and for challenges that lay far beyond the walls of the house. Her guidance was shaping him into someone capable, confident, and prepared for life's complexities. She also shared personal stories, not to boast, but to teach. She spoke of times when she had made mistakes, faced setbacks, and experienced losses. She explained how she had learned from each failure, how she had rebuilt her life, and how patience, careful planning, and resilience had been key to her success. These stories were lessons in themselves, showing him that life was not only about wealth or status, but about character, judgment, and perseverance. As he absorbed her teachings, he began to feel a sense of gratitude he had not anticipated. At first he had resented the marriage, feeling trapped and unsure about the path ahead. But now he realized that she had given him something far greater than he had imagined. She had given him knowledge, guidance, and the tools to shape his own life. He began to understand that her specific plans were not about controlling him, but about preparing him to thrive independently. Their conversations deepened. She encouraged him to think about his own goals, to dream beyond immediate comfort, and to plan for the long term. She asked challenging questions, pushing him to reflect on his strengths, weaknesses, and values. At first, he found these questions difficult, even uncomfortable. But over time, he began to see them as opportunities to grow, to clarify his thoughts, and to define the person he wanted to become. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet study, she said, "I chose you because I saw potential. But potential alone is nothing without effort. I want you to learn to take responsibility, to face challenges with courage, and to prepare yourself for a life that is meaningful and independent." Her words struck him deeply. He realized that this marriage, unusual as it was, had given him a chance to become someone stronger, wiser, and more capable than he had ever imagined. He also began to notice subtle lessons in daily life. Even seemingly ordinary tasks like planning meals, managing household schedules, or keeping track of expenses were opportunities to practice discipline and foresight. She encouraged him to take initiative, to anticipate problems, and to develop solutions. These small exercises gradually built his confidence, helping him see that responsibility was not a burden but a skill to be mastered. With each passing day, he grew more aware of the depth of her intentions. She had not simply married him for companionship. She had seen in him the potential to carry forward knowledge, experience, and values she had cultivated over a lifetime. She was preparing him to be more than a husband in name. She was preparing him to be a capable, independent adult who could navigate life's challenges with wisdom and courage. Despite the age difference, a quiet bond began to form between them. It was not a bond of romance, but of mutual respect, understanding, and shared purpose. He realized that she had chosen to invest in him, to teach him, and to guide him because she believed in what he could become. And in return, he began to trust her judgment, value her guidance, and look forward to the lessons each day would bring. By the end of the first year, the transformation within him was evident. He was more disciplined, more thoughtful, and more confident. He could see the ways in which her guidance had shaped him, not through force or pressure, but through careful mentorship, patience, and wisdom. He understood that her very specific plans were designed to help him grow, and he began to embrace them rather than resist them. He realized finally that what had once seemed like an unfair, unusual situation was now a journey of learning, growth, and preparation. The woman he had married, whom he had once viewed with fear and uncertainty, had become a teacher, mentor, and guide, and he began to feel a sense of purpose he had never known. The purpose of learning, growing, and becoming someone capable of carrying forward the lessons she had so carefully prepared for him. Over time, their relationship began to evolve in ways he had never expected. What had started as a strange and awkward arrangement slowly grew into a connection that was based on respect, trust, and a quiet understanding. He realized that she was not only guiding him to manage his responsibilities, but she was also helping him discover who he could become as a person. Each day in her home had a rhythm that he had once found intimidating, but now he appreciated it. Mornings began early with simple exercises and breakfast, followed by discussions about daily plans, lessons in managing finances, and sometimes quiet reflection over tea. Evenings were spent in the study, where she encouraged him to think deeply about his goals, reflect on his progress, and consider how he could use his skills to make life better for himself and others. At first, he had resisted these routines. He had felt trapped, unsure of why he was being forced into such a strict schedule. But as weeks turned into months, he began to see the wisdom behind her approach. Each small task, each lesson, and each conversation was building a foundation for something much larger than he had imagined. He realized that she was carefully teaching him not only practical skills, but also patience, resilience, and the value of thoughtful decision-making. Their conversations became richer and more meaningful over time. She asked him questions that challenged him to think critically. "Why do you believe that?" she would ask gently when he made a statement. "Have you considered the consequences?" Sometimes he would feel frustrated, thinking that she was being too demanding. But he soon realized that her questions were meant to help him see beyond the obvious, to develop a mindset that would allow him to make wise choices in the future. If he mentioned a hobby or skill he wanted to learn, she would support him, even arranging for resources or people who could teach him. She never imposed her own preferences or interests upon him, but she always emphasized the importance of learning, growth, and using time wisely. Slowly, he began to see that she cared not only about guiding him, but also about helping him find his own path in life. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden together, she shared a story from her youth. She told him about the challenges she had faced, the mistakes she had made, and the lessons she had learned along the way. Listening to her, he realized that her experiences were far more than stories. They were tools, carefully chosen to teach him values like patience, honesty. Each story carried a hidden lesson, and he began to understand that this marriage had been designed to prepare him for the world, not just for her company. He started to notice changes within himself. The nervousness and hesitation he had felt in the early days were slowly replaced by confidence and clarity. He began to take initiative, managing household tasks efficiently, making decisions with thoughtfulness, and approaching challenges with a calm, rational mindset. For the first time, he felt that he was growing into a person capable of handling life's responsibilities independently. She also introduced him to her friends and colleagues, people who had achieved success in their fields through hard work, intelligence, and discipline. At first, he had felt intimidated by their experience and age, but she encouraged him to observe, ask questions, and learn from their experiences. She explained that success was not just about knowledge, but about how one applied it, and that mistakes could be powerful teachers if approached with reflection and humility. Over time, he began to see the subtle ways in which she was shaping him. Every suggestion, every task, every conversation was carefully designed to teach him skills, build his character, and prepare him for life beyond her home. He realized that she had a clear vision for him, and that she was investing her time, wisdom, and energy to ensure that he would become the best version of himself. Their bond grew stronger, not through words of affection, but through shared experiences, mutual respect, and the understanding that each cared for the other's well-being. He began to see her not just as a teacher or a guide, but as someone who genuinely wanted to see him succeed and thrive. She, in turn, respected his efforts, celebrated his achievements, and gently corrected his mistakes. One evening, while reviewing his progress in the notebook she had given him, she said, "You've come a long way. I can see that you are learning to think clearly, make wise choices, and take responsibility for your actions. This is what I hoped for when I chose you." Her words struck him deeply. For the first time, he realized that she had not simply wanted a companion. She had wanted someone who could learn, grow, and carry forward the values and knowledge she had cultivated over decades. He began to reflect on how much he had changed since the day of the marriage. He remembered the fear, confusion, and resistance he had felt, and compared it to the confidence, clarity, and purpose he felt now. It was astonishing to him that a relationship that had begun under such unusual circumstances had transformed into a source of learning, growth, and personal development. They also shared small moments of understanding and connection. When he faced a difficult decision or a problem he could not solve, she would sit with him quietly, listening, guiding, and offering advice without taking control. When he succeeded in a task or made progress in his learning, she would acknowledge it sincerely, showing that she valued his effort and initiative. Through these small but meaningful interactions, he began to feel a sense of partnership and trust that went beyond the formal structure of their marriage. At times, he still struggled with feelings of discomfort about their age difference. There were moments when he felt awkward or out of place, unsure how to act or what to say, but she never made him feel embarrassed or pressured. Instead, she treated him with dignity, respect, and kindness, which gradually helped him overcome his insecurities. Her guidance extended beyond practical skills. She encouraged him to reflect on his values, consider the impact of his choices on others, and think about the kind of person he wanted to become. She emphasized that true success was not measured solely by wealth or status, but by integrity, wisdom, and the ability to contribute positively to the lives of others. Slowly, he began to internalize these lessons, realizing that life was about more than immediate satisfaction or convenience. It was about growth, responsibility, and purpose. One day, she asked him a question that he would remember for years. "What do you want your life to look like in 10 years?" she asked. At first, he struggled to answer, unsure how to imagine a future that had once seemed uncertain and overwhelming. But as he reflected on her guidance, the lessons he had learned, and the skills he had acquired, he began to form a vision for himself. He realized that he could build a life of independence, purpose, and meaningful achievement, a life shaped by the wisdom she had imparted and the discipline she had encouraged. This realization marked a turning point in their relationship. He no longer saw the marriage as a burden or a strange arrangement. He began to see it as an opportunity, a rare chance to grow, learn, and prepare for a future he could be proud of. And he began to appreciate her not only for her wisdom, but for her foresight, patience, and care in guiding him toward this growth. The household, once intimidating and unfamiliar, now felt like a place of learning and opportunity. He took pride in his contributions, whether managing tasks, learning new skills, or planning for the future. The daily routines that had once seemed strict and demanding now felt like a framework for success, providing structure, focus, and purpose. Neighbors and friends began to notice the change in him. The young man who had once appeared uncertain and hesitant now carried himself with confidence and composure. People commented on his maturity, his thoughtfulness, and the way he handled responsibilities with care. He realized that these changes were the result of her guidance and mentorship, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the transformation she had facilitated. By the end of the second year of their marriage, he had grown into a capable, confident, and responsible young man. He had learned not only practical skills, but also the importance of patience, reflection, and wise decision-making. He understood that her very specific plans had been designed to prepare him for life, to equip him with knowledge, skills, and character traits that would serve him well in every aspect of his future. Even in quiet moments when they sat together in the study or walked through the garden, he felt a sense of connection and understanding. There was no need for grand gestures or declarations of affection. The bond they shared was rooted in respect, trust, and shared purpose, a bond that had grown naturally through daily interactions, mentorship, and the careful shaping of his character. He finally realized that the unusual circumstances of their marriage had been a gift in disguise. What had once seemed like an unfair and difficult situation had become a journey of learning, growth, and self-discovery. And he understood that the woman he had married, whom he had once approached with fear and uncertainty, had given him far more than companionship. She had given him the tools, guidance, and confidence to create a future he could truly call his own. Several years had passed since the unusual marriage had first been arranged. He, once hesitant and unsure, had grown into a confident, capable, and independent young man. The awkwardness and fear that had marked his first days with her had gradually faded, replaced by understanding, respect, and a quiet sense of gratitude. He had learned more than he could have imagined, about life, responsibility, discipline, and the value of thoughtful choices. Yet, even as he reflected on all he had gained, he could sense that there was still something more she had planned, something important she had yet to share. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, she asked him to sit with her in the study. The room smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, and the gentle ticking of the clock filled the quiet space between them. She had a calm, composed expression, but he could sense a seriousness in her eyes that told him this conversation was significant. "I believe it is time for you to understand everything," she said, her voice gentle but firm. He looked at her, curious and slightly nervous. He had always known that she had reasons for the guidance, discipline, and lessons she had provided over the years, but he did not yet fully understand the full purpose behind them. She began to explain her plans, slowly and carefully. She told him that her life had been long, filled with hard work, careful decisions, and lessons learned through experience. She had built a life of stability and comfort, but she knew that wealth, knowledge, and experience could be wasted if not passed on wisely. She had chosen him not because of duty or convenience, but because she had seen potential in him, potential that with guidance could grow into something remarkable. Her words struck him deeply. All those years of lessons, routines, and careful mentorship suddenly made complete sense. He realized that nothing she had done had been random. Every task, every question, every small responsibility she had given him had been carefully designed to prepare him for independence, responsibility, and a meaningful life, You have learned to manage responsibilities, make decisions, and think critically, she continued. But more importantly, you have learned to understand the value of guidance, patience, and reflection. These are the tools you will need for the future. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Everything I have done was meant to ensure that you would not only survive in this world, but thrive in it. He felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. At first he had seen this marriage as a burden, something forced upon him with little consideration for his own desires. But now he realized that it had been a rare opportunity, a chance to grow, learn, and prepare for life under the careful guidance of someone who had already walked the path he was now taking. Over the following weeks, she began to gradually involve him in larger decisions and responsibilities. She asked for his opinions on investments, encouraged him to start small projects, and allowed him to make choices that would directly impact their household and community. She observed silently, offering advice only when necessary, and giving him the freedom to succeed or make mistakes on his own. At first he was nervous. He had never managed anything on such a scale before, and the weight of responsibility felt heavy. But with each challenge, he grew more confident. He began to see that her guidance had given him not just skills, but also the ability to trust himself. He realized that he could handle complex situations, think strategically, and make decisions that balanced risk and reward. In quiet moments, they would discuss life beyond the household. She encouraged him to think about his goals, the impact he wanted to have, and the legacy he wanted to leave. He began to see that the lessons she had taught were not only practical, but also deeply philosophical. She had prepared him to understand life's complexities, to value integrity and hard work, and to recognize that true success required more than wealth. It required character, wisdom, and foresight. He also began to understand the depth of her care. She had not only prepared him for financial stability, but also for life itself. She had nurtured his confidence, guided his moral compass, and helped him develop the patience and resilience necessary to face challenges with composure. Her mentorship had transformed him from a young man unsure of himself into someone capable of leading a meaningful life. As time went on, he began to take initiative in areas he had once avoided. He started small community projects, helped others in need, and applied the lessons she had taught him to real-world situations. He discovered that he enjoyed these challenges and that the skills he had learned were valuable not only for managing resources but also for helping others. He realized that her plans had always extended beyond the household. She had prepared him to make a positive difference in the wider world. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden together, she asked him about his dreams for the future. "Now that you have learned so much, what do you hope to achieve?" she asked. He thought carefully before answering, realizing that he now had the knowledge, confidence, and skills to pursue meaningful goals. "I want to create opportunities for others," he said. "I want to use what I've learned to help people grow, just as you helped me." She smiled, a quiet, satisfied smile that seemed to carry years of wisdom and understanding. "That is exactly what I hoped you would learn," she said. "Knowledge and skills are meaningless if they are not used to create good in the world. You have grown into someone I can trust to carry forward what I have built, and perhaps even build something greater." He realized in that moment the full significance of everything she had done. The marriage, which had seemed strange and uncomfortable at first, had been a journey of transformation. He had not only gained practical skills and knowledge, but had also learned the value of mentorship, discipline, and purpose. He had given him more than guidance. She had given him a foundation for life, a framework upon which he could build a meaningful future. In the months that followed, he continued to apply what he had learned. He took on more responsibilities, made independent decisions, and began to shape his own path. He no longer felt like someone living under strict guidance. He felt like someone prepared to navigate life with confidence, wisdom, and integrity. The lessons she had imparted were now part of him, shaping his character and informing every choice he made. She watched him quietly, satisfied with the progress he had made. She knew that her work was complete, not because he had mastered every skill, but because he had learned to think, act, and grow independently. He had internalized the lessons she had taught, and he was ready to face the world on his own terms. Their bond had also evolved. It was no longer defined by the unusual circumstances of their marriage, but by mutual respect, understanding, and shared purpose. He valued her guidance, wisdom, and care, and she respected his growth, independence, and integrity. Together, they had created a relationship that was unconventional, but deeply meaningful, based on trust, learning, and the shared goal of building a purposeful life. Eventually, she explained her final plan clearly. She wanted him to carry forward the knowledge, skills, and values she had imparted, to apply them in ways that would benefit not only himself, but others as well. She trusted him to manage resources wisely, to make thoughtful decisions, and to continue the legacy she had built over decades. Her guidance had prepared him not just to inherit wealth or responsibility, but to live a life of purpose, integrity, and impact. He understood fully now. The marriage had never been about control or convenience. It had been about guidance, mentorship, and the careful preparation of someone with potential. Through her teachings, she had given him the tools to shape his own destiny, to face challenges with confidence, and to build a meaningful, independent life. As he reflected on the journey from a reluctant young man to a confident, capable adult, he felt deep gratitude and respect for her. The lessons, challenges, and guidance she had provided had transformed him in ways he could never have achieved alone. He realized that life sometimes presents opportunities disguised as challenges, and that the wisdom of those who guide us can shape our future in ways we may not immediately understand. In the end, he recognized that this unusual marriage had been a gift. It had given him knowledge, skills, confidence, and a clear vision for the future. He had learned patience, discipline, responsibility, and integrity, lessons that would guide him for the rest of his life. And through it all, he had discovered that mentorship, respect, and guidance can transform even the most unexpected circumstances into a journey of growth, purpose, and fulfillment. As he looked at her one evening sitting calmly in the study, he realized how much he had grown, and how much she had shaped that growth. The woman who had seemed so intimidating at first had become the most important teacher of his life. And now, prepared for the future, he felt ready to step into the world with confidence, carrying forward everything she had taught him and creating a life of his own choosing. He knew that her plans had been precise, thoughtful, and purposeful, and he felt a profound sense of respect and gratitude. The marriage, which had begun as a strange and challenging arrangement, had become a transformative journey, and in the quiet of that evening, he understood fully that what she had given him was far greater than guidance or wealth. She had given him a foundation for life itself.